I want to pay a compliment to Chris, to you, Regina.
We are live, so I want
Love
to
it.
take a moment, excuse me.
Cough drop, mint.
Excuse me, everyone. I am recovering from a very bad cold. I'm going to take a sip, regroup with myself for just one moment, and I know you guys will give me grace. And I want to welcome you all to the Women at the Top podcast, today's author interview series. My name is Regina Barr, and this very sexy voice, I'm not crying, is a result of my cold. And most of you know me, or if you don't, I'm the founder of the Women at the Top network, and I'll be your host today. Joining me today is author Leslie Rubin, and I am certainly going to have her do most of the talking. She is the CEO and founder of Matterz Advisors, which is a strategic communications consultancy specializing in leadership development. She has over 2 decades of experience working with C-level executives and emerging leaders, and she is passionate about helping leaders craft their authentic leadership presence and enhance their communication skills. She's the author of 2 books, Filling the Leadership Gap, 8 Strategies for Creating Dynamic Leadership Presence, and Meaning, How Leaders Create Meaning and Clarity During Times of Crisis and Opportunity. So, Leslie, I'm so excited that you're here with me today that I'm shedding a little tear.
Oh my gosh. Thank you for having me, Regina. I'm really excited to talk to you and share with your listeners.
I am delighted to have you here today. So, we're going to go ahead and jump in. And
Please.
like I said, I think I'm going to have you do most of the talking just because I don't have a voice today.
All
So I
good.
want to talk a little bit about your most recent book, which focuses on insights and practical strategies to elevate your leadership presence. And
Yeah.
I always like to get the backstory from our authors. So I would love to know what inspired you to write the book,
Yeah.
Filling the Leadership Gap.
Yeah, my inspiration for writing this book really came from years of both working as well as observation of effective leaders and not so effective leaders. So there was really a reoccurring theme when it came to just years of working with multiple leaders and leaders on the rise, as well as leaders that are seasoned professionals. But this was really about observation in the sense of how are they making an impact? Are they making an impact? And where were the elements that really came up quite often? So that was confidence, it can be communication, it's also building trust and rapport with your teams and the importance of having that so you can move them along with you and you have greater influence. So this was a culmination of so many things and working with different leadership groups, observation, but it was more around how do we ultimately package this to help individuals be more effective in their leadership role or just fine tune where they are as a leader.
What's always interesting to me is very often these leaders, they don't really always know what makes them effective. They're not like
Yeah.
in touch with that part of themselves. So it can be hard for them to determine what makes an effective leader. So, what do you mean by leadership presence and why is it so important for us?
I find that leadership presence is actually really crucial. And more I'm hearing in the courses that I teach or the executives that I coach that it's that, and the reason filling the leadership gap, there's often a gap. And having the awareness of what is that gap or what's the feedback that I'm getting so that I can fill that gap to get to the next level. So for me, in looking at leadership presence, this is about leaders and how they show up. Um, is it in times of stress? Is it in times of just in general, how they're showing up with confidence, how they're communicating, and really projecting what it is that they stand for? So I often think of a leadership brand. If you think of a product, we are a product and we have an opportunity to create the brand and experience that people have with us. So let's just say you take 3 words. How do you want to be known in those 3 words and build that brand around that? So it's effectively building and embodying those qualities that people want or that they need in your leadership style. And leadership presence is one of those elements that either is going to keep you at the place you are now or take you to that next level. So, really thinking about how you're crafting that brand, think of products that you like, love, and enjoy. How do they make you feel? What do they symbolize? We have an opportunity as well to do the same thing. We want to craft and put ourselves out there so people want more of what we're doing and have them experience in a way that keeps them coming back for more, keeps them
I think
loyal.
that's great. Yes, because it is all about an experience. And I think if people thought more of it that way, very often with leaders, we talk about the what and not necessarily the how they're doing things. And I think the how is how
Yeah.
you're getting into this presence and the brand that you bring forward. So I'm really glad you're talking about that because I just think it's so important. And not because I was a former marketing executive, but
I
maybe
know
that
that.
has something to do with it as
Yeah.
well. So but let's go back to your book. So, in your book, you talk about 8 leadership strategies in filling the leadership gap that focus on building leadership presence and really, in my mind, importantly, effectiveness, right? Because you don't want to just be present, you also need to be able to get things done in your organization. So, the bulk of our viewing and listening audience are business women. So, either working in the corporate realm or have their own companies. So, with if you had to pick one, which one do you think women struggle with the most? Tell us why.
I would say that it's the confidence to speak up. And that may come, it could be cultural, it could be impact points and people of influence along the way in your career or even in your life, how that's shaped the lens of, oh, I don't want to speak up. There's also a component of it, of the experience of being shut down or judged. So that can make someone hesitant. It's the one thing in particular that people are asked, women in particular, I want to be more confident in speaking up in meetings. So my guidance there is often prepare. So even if it's, yes, I know we're back to back to back on meetings, how do I prepare? Is there a pre read? Is there an agenda? But prepare to speak in a meeting. And you've been invited to the meeting. You have a seat at the table. It's how you utilize it. So, utilizing that seat at the table and being an effective communicator are essential for great presence. I often think of it too as practicing when it's in a low stakes, less risky or
Yes.
maybe more comfortable with the friendlies, as I might say, in a work environment. Practicing that, speaking up before, writing down 1 or 2 things you want to say. And with this being in a remote environment or hybrid environment, it may not be something you speak up in a Zoom or a room, but it could be, hey, let me put it in chat. That might be a little bit more low risk in doing that versus, oh my gosh, I'm going to speak up in a meeting and there's, a whole group of men and I'm the only female. Yeah, that's nerve-wracking, 100%. But it's your opportunity to shine and step in because you do have unique value to offer.
I'm glad that you said that to practice and prep. I am
Yeah.
definitely a person that when I walk a lot, I have a dog, and when I'm walking, a lot of times I visualize how I want things to come out, and I will visualize myself, especially if it's a difficult or a meeting where the stakes are high. Like I'll think through what I want to say. I'll visualize what it feels like success feels like
Yes.
and getting a positive outcome feels like. I visualize myself smiling, maybe shaking hands after the meeting, things like that. So I always say to people, like, because they're like, oh, that feels so woo woo. I'm like, really? Because whenever I talk to like or read articles from
Yeah.
athletes, they're always saying that they're visualizing this stuff and they work with a coach. I'm like,
Yeah.
they're doing something right. So, um, try it out, might help and can't hurt, right? So, I think that can go a long way in helping to build that confidence as well. So I love that because I think
Yeah.
sometimes people think when some women in particular are doing something successfully, like speaking up and speaking out, that it just comes like from nowhere, just naturally. And for some people, it is natural, but for many people, we do plan and prep, and we do make sure that we know what we're talking about. Because I also think sometimes the stakes are higher for women,
Yeah.
right? So we are probably expected to know more. So I always say, you don't have to give all the detail when you're speaking, but keep it in your back pocket just in case. So
Yeah,
I love
and
that.
there are two things that you've said in there, Regina. One is part of your preparation plan should have a bit of visualization, should have, shutting your eyes and thinking about it. It could be 30 seconds. But I will tell you, my friend Steve Swavely, who talks about the neuroplasticity and training your brain to experience something before it happens, decreases your nerves. So if
Mhm.
you see yourself or I see myself, I still do power poses. Amy Cuddy, yay.
Yes.
Doing a power pose and doing some breathing to relax my diaphragm, do my visualization. Woo woo or not, 100% works.
Yes.
High
Completely agree
stakes or
about that.
not, it just add that
Mhm.
into your checklist. Absolutely.
Yes.
Mhm,
So you talk a lot about building a leadership brand identity. So I'd
mhm.
love for you to talk with the folks that are listening or watching today how they can, as leaders, create this.
Yeah, I mentioned 3 words. What are the 3 words you want to be known? And also think about how you want people to experience you as a brand. I think of something like, let me give an example here. Um, a leader wants to be known as being more collaborative or more strategic. How do you put that in play? Both your actions, the way that you communicate, the way that people experience you. So maybe strategic is an element you've told you need to be more or do more of. So, how do you start doing that? Looking for ways to approach something differently, looking at the bigger picture, speaking and using language that you would show up to be more or appear to be more strategic. So it's really one, training your brain, two, training others on what they can expect or experience from you. So in your brand, look at yourself as a product in a good way. How do you want people to receive this product? What is it that they're guaranteed in working with you?
I
So,
like
what's
when you talk
yeah,
about treating yourself as a product. So I'm just going to segue on something because we're talking about
sure.
leadership presence. So presence is also how you package the product. So, you know, think about that a little bit too. Like I remember when I was more junior level and aspiring to grow in my career, I also looked at what the folks above me were wearing. So like what I noticed, this was back in the day when casual Friday was
Mhm.
a big deal and new, and we would do fundraisers like you got to wear jeans if you paid $1 to whatever charity we were supporting. And so it was like a big deal, but I noticed that all of the more senior level people, if they wore jeans, they were like dress jeans, like dark black jeans, and they always had on like even if it was a little more casual, a jacket and a scarf. And so that's what I always did. Like I made sure that I presented the package so that if, and it did happen, especially with some of the work that I was doing, I got called into an executive office. I felt pulled together, not
Yes.
sloppy, not nice shoes, not crappy sneakers, which crappy sneakers are fine if you're walking the dog, but not when you're going to the workplace. Wear them. Like I used to live in New York and I worked in Manhattan. Yes, I did wear sneakers from time to time
On the
to the
subway.
office,
Sure.
but then I had a drawer full of shoes
Yeah.
and I would get in and take them off and put on my nice shoes, and that's what I wore around. So with that, I want to shift gears a little bit and I want to talk a little bit about communication. And one
Yeah.
of the things I always tell people, it's kind of like with real estate, it's location, location, location. And I think to be a successful leader, it's communicate, communicate, communicate. I'm all about
Yes.
transparency. So I think we can
Yeah.
agree communication with your colleagues is a critical skill. So when you think about the leaders that you've worked with and the folks that are listening or watching today, what can they do to improve their communication so that they can inspire their teams?
Yeah, there's so much of that that goes into the planning of how you communicate. So you and I chatted earlier about that planning of a video or that planning of actually just getting ourselves together to be here. So there are elements of that that we want to be effective. So what does that look like for a leader with their employees? What do we want them to know, believe, feel, and do? So if we go into a situation, be it a limited restructuring or layoffs, be it exciting news about a project that's launched, how do we want our employees to receive that? There's also consistency and frequency. I've worked with some amazing leaders who did great events each quarter. They rallied the team. They shared both the fun stuff as well as the, hey, business isn't doing so well in certain situations. And that everyone felt connected and really united because of this and because of the leader. And then it was radio silence. And I'm still in touch with many of the employees. It was years ago, a client of mine, and they've come back to say, we don't hear from him anymore. And so that leaves them in a state of, ooh, what's going on? And when there's ambiguity, employees feel uncomfortable. And as leaders, you start to be comfortable with the unknown and when times of ambiguity. But when you're at a different level or managerial level, and you're trying to communicate to your team what's going on and not hearing anything, that can put things in a bad state. So I would say being an effective communicator in terms of sharing the strategy, giving your team the priorities, setting those with them, that North Star, so important of how they're contributing to the organization and the priorities of how they're contributing. One, breeds loyalty, gives people insight as to the priorities and how they're contributing. We all want to do that. But more importantly, think about how you plan, think about how consistently you do it, and the medium. We have different generations who receive their information differently, expectations.
Yes.
Set all of that for your team in advance, but also have a two-way conversation. This is not just one way out. Being an active listener is part of this, and getting feedback or insights from your employees gives you an opportunity as a leader to set different direction, to lead differently if it's needed in certain situations.
I loved what you said, especially about we have different audiences and different ways of communicating or how people like to receive information. And
Yeah.
I always tell folks, and I try to practice this myself, many times, many ways is a saying that anyone who's been around me for 6 seconds or more will hear that, especially if I'm working in a corporate environment, many times, many ways. And I think what happens sometimes as leaders and managers, we're privy to a lot more information than
Yes.
gets dispensed out, right? So we actually have a better sense of what's going on and maybe can feel better about it. So then you start to communicate with people who maybe aren't involved in all those things. And even just letting people know there's no news to share can go a long way because you're still connecting and hopefully and engaging with people in a variety of ways. And I loved what you said. Sometimes it's not about what you're saying, it's about listening to what's on people's minds. And that gives
Yes.
you an opportunity to then address it because there may be things that, you know, you can address even in times when there's not a lot of information being communicated. So love that.
Yeah. And your voice and words are so powerful as a leader. So, in the position that you're in, how effectively are you using it? You really do have such a great opportunity. And the word you used earlier, as far as transparency, I may not have anything that I can share with the group, but at least letting them know that they might
Yeah,
exhale. And then we keep forging forward. But at least you've shared with them what you can share.
absolutely. Love that. So let's talk about change. I always like to joke around. I love change as long as it
Yeah.
doesn't impact me.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah.
I've done I'm sure you have come in as a change agent. I come in as a change agent, and then
Yes.
I remember going through a period of time, in my own little world, all these changes were going on. I was like, "Wow." I remember thinking to myself, "It's great that the consultant and coach is going through this as a reminder of what it's like to have a profound amount of change happening." So
Yeah.
with that, adapting to change and thinking on your feet is important if you want to be a successful leader. And
You
I have a
bet.
program titled How to Think on Your Feet Without Getting Run Over. So this is a topic that's kind of near and dear to my heart. So tell us, if you will, why this is such a critical trait for leaders and how can they cultivate it? Because I think sometimes people are afraid to think on their feet.
Yeah, and I love that you've got a program specifically for that. It's a difficult one for a few reasons. And then I'll give some insights as to things that you can do to prepare for it. So it's difficult when you may be an introvert. And there's even science behind it that our pathways are longer and shorter. And some people need more information and they need to process it. Then they can give a response to something. So I was working with a group last week of leaders, and we were talking about voice of leadership. And one of them said, I don't process things really quickly. In meetings, we need to move really quick. I'm this sort of person personally. I've got 80% of the information. I can drive us forward. I can formulate something. I can think on my feet. Extrovert. This person self-identified. I'm a complete introvert. And English was a second language. So even thinking about how they're processing it to then communicate it in a different language. People can step back and say, I'd like to process that. Let me come back to you later. I think there's great opportunity to do that when you want to create a connection with someone, but you need a few minutes. Because the one thing I hear often, ooh, I had a good answer after I left the meeting. This comes back to, again, the preparation. Spending some time to look through an agenda, look through a pre-read, really setting yourself up to, I need to talk, being present. So again, this goes along the lines of our visualization. What's my mindset going into the meeting? Am I thinking about that I've got a sick relative, or am I thinking about what I'm doing this weekend or making a grocery list during the meeting? If you know there is a potential that you could be called upon, being so hyper vigilant and focused where you are in that meeting, really actively listening, making some notes for yourself, formulating a question while you're there, or formulating, ooh, I think I'm going to be asked about this. How can I respond? So I think so much of it comes back to preparation, and it's not easy, but
I do.
it's up there
I
even with presence in general. It can be cultivated.
Absolutely. And I like what you said about more or less being present when you're present, because I do think in the environment we experience today, stay off your phone,
Yeah.
take notes. When you take notes, it forces you to stay engaged, especially if you're an extrovert and you move quickly. And maybe it's someone who's more analytical and needs to express more of the details, which may bore you, or you can move more quickly through that
Yeah.
process to get where you want to go. Take notes, it shows that you're engaged and interested, or jot ideas. Like that's when sometimes I'm listening to someone, an idea comes up, I jot it down. Doesn't mean I'm always going to share it in the meeting if it's relevant, or if it's relevant maybe, but sometimes it may not be relevant right at that moment, but I jot down the ideas because I can use them later or in a different setting. And I think that's really important. So I'm glad you kind of talked a little bit about behavioral style, because if you are going to be a successful leader, it's your job to understand the different behavioral styles of people so that you can draw out their best gifts. I will
Absolutely.
tell you that the introverts very often don't speak up because all the extroverts are vying. It's like, I call it like fighter pilots. They're all vying
Yes.
for airspace, fighting over the airspace, trying to get airspace. And then the introverts are sitting there taking it all in. And sometimes if we don't call on them or say, hey, so and so, what are you thinking? Sometimes they're the ones that dot all the I's and cross the T's and like kind of wrap it up with a bow. So we all have something to bring to the table. We just need to know or figure out how to bring it to the table. So I love
Yeah.
that. So
And
let's talk a little. Oh, sorry, go
I was
ahead.
just going to say, and it behooves the leader or the person who's managing the meeting to see if that other, because you've got all the fighter pilots piling on, having that person who's leading the meeting or running the agenda to say, oh, we haven't heard from Regina, or we haven't heard from Chris.
Right.
So it's checking in and taking a pulse. to
Right.
see, one, that they've got one, but two, they've got insight. They do, but at least asking for their input.
Mm-hmm. Agree completely. So you've worked with a lot of C-level executives and other leaders. So how does filling the leadership gap address the challenges that leaders face in particular today, given our remote and our hybrid work environments?
Yeah, I would say that leadership today you've had to step up a different notch. And it's because you may not have people who are in the office all the time. There's that creating the connectedness or unity. And I see that as such a huge element of being a good leader, is creating that cohesiveness, driving the engagement in a dispersed workforce. And
That
by
is so critical, I think, because I think a lot of people feel disengaged, don't you, with
Mhm.
being hybrid and remote in a way that perhaps we didn't when we were all present together?
Yeah. And sometimes I need to step in and go to one of my clients' site and work with them and get people. It's not just going to my exercise class every day for community, or I enjoy the quiet if I'm working from my home office. But there are others who thrive in working in a Starbucks or loud open space environment. But when it comes back to the leadership, I emphasize intentionality. There may be that next level of being an intentional leader to reach out to the teams that are remote, to bring people together in a different way. Could it be, you're sending a paint kit and everyone's doing a home project at home and we're all on cameras, or a cocktail mixology kit? How are you bringing your team together for both the work environment, but also a little bit of fun?
Hmm. I
Yeah.
would be down with the paint kit myself. Sometimes I get those Dollar Tree paint by numbers. Like,
Yeah.
I always tell people I'm not artistic, but I am creative. So I like to have creative outlines. I could never paint a picture on my own, but I can certainly fill in the colors. So I would be
Yeah.
down with that for sure. So I
Yeah.
want to shift to talk a little bit about appreciating feedback and the
Yeah.
power of receiving feedback. What role does feedback play in becoming a stronger leader? Because I think sometimes we have a hard time accepting and receiving feedback.
Yeah. Um, I was one of those early in career because I had had a bad experience in receiving feedback. The timing wasn't right. I might not have been in the right mindset. I was immature in the timing as well. And understanding that that person who was giving me feedback, and I will say, think about the source that's coming to you with that feedback, that it was for good intention. So, leaders for me who are actively seeking feedback are the ones that have stronger relationships, they have more engaged employees, and they show a willingness to learn. So, those points of feedback, are they multiple and are they going in the same direction? So, if you're getting those, having some awareness on how the feedback is given to you, on how you absorb it, how you utilize it, and potentially how you shift. So, a little bit of self awareness. How am I impacting people? Oh, that might not be coming across the way I want by way of feedback. So, looking at modifying or improving, that's the only way we're going to get that gift of feedback. And I do think of it as a gift. And yes, sometimes we want to, put it on the shelf or white elephant it, but there's a reason we're getting it. People who've worked with me know that I use words like insight. What insight or input do you have? That softens it a little bit for me, and it might soften it for someone else.
Hmm.
So, trying, when you give feedback or asking for insights or input, looking at the source, having regular feedback is really important. So it might not just be that once a year feedback in your review, but doing a check-in, having those trusted
Absolutely.
sources around you to give you feedback. Am I crazy? Do I really do that? Well, what would you
Exactly.
say is really important for your growth as a leader?
I think that's great. I always tell people whenever possible, accept feedback in the spirit in which it was intended. So if it's
Yeah.
intended in a positive way, then think about what you can do with that and how you can improve on that. If it just is intended to cut you down or to harm you in some way, then still think about what you need to do with that and how you can use that information to help move you forward. So,
You bet.
love that. So, we are actually winding down on time. And I always like to close out with a piece of advice that you could give to our viewers and listeners today. So, if you could tell us something in brief, what would be a piece of advice when it comes to developing your authentic leadership brand or something else that we've talked about today?
Yeah. How did this go so fast, Regina? Thank you. This
Yes, it
has been
always
great.
goes fast.
Yeah. I think about um, the piece of advice, think about the leader that you want to be. Think about the legacy that you want to create, the impact that you have on the people who report to you, the impact that you have on the world, the impact you have on your business. But being intentional about that leadership, giving thought, consideration to your leadership style, how you're communicating, how you're showing up with confidence. I know it's not easy and I know it's not innate for many of us. And this is just like building a muscle at the gym that, yes, practice and time will help that. And each small step gets us towards that amazing leadership brand and having great executive presence. I always think of the
Wonderful.
leaders that I work with: lead with vision, inspire with presence. How do you want to do that?
I love that. So that is all we have time for today. And I want to say a big thank you to Leslie for being here today with us. And also a big thank you to our viewers and listeners for joining us today. With that, we'll see you all next time.
Thank you, Regina. Enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you.